Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for showing up. This is going to be a light interlude between the Cracked Eng sessions later on today, so you can relax a little bit. I think the aim is to pull back the curtain a tad on research and kind of reveal some of the nuance that we have to work through on a daily basis, but moreover, kind of flag just how critical all the tools that you're developing that we're so thankful for to kind of push us through the fails and improve going forward. So on that, I think one of the pleasant upsides of this chaos that is Gen AI hype is just the huge increase in talent that's kind of moved into AI and all the tools that are developing, so much so that if you just go over a couple of months bit by bit, the VCs have basically decided to give up on tracking everything that you're doing. So just a quick thank you. So example number one, go back way to all of 2023 when our little agents were just blooming, struggling with single turns, very brittle, just learning the little tools that they were developing and calling. So we decided to do a very quick test, kind of working in the model research lab. Usually we kind of have alpha internal kind of dog fooding, and then we'll beta it to kind of an external design partner. In this case, it was a large hyperscaler. We thought, very simple test. We'll just get it to spin up some containers and kind of populate kind of the Dockers and Kubernetes, etc. Make note here of the question that it asks. It asks, how would you like me to name it? So since it was running on Microsoft, we said, let's keep it simple, MS1, 2, 3, 4, simples. So of course, we were very proud of ourselves, kicked back, and expected the glory to flow in. But sadly, no. Within about half an hour or so, our execs, all of which you know very well, CEOs of the company, were ringing us, asking why the CISO of the hyperscaler was getting a P0 critical tag paged and mass escalation, and one of their cages in the data center was kind of locked out. Now remember, this is a very simple little task of spinning out containers. Note the Shogarth. So, hallelujah for Pydantic and the rest, we kind of logged in to try and kind of trace back what on earth happened. So we look through it, we kind of see the metrics, and we see that something's happening in MS13. Again, we try and figure out kind of what's been, debugging, where the escalations happened. You've got the full end-to-end click-through. Transpires that MS13 is an international terrorist organization that the ICE and Trump is especially focused on right now, linked to El Salvador. So the model had done everything right in that it kind of went through and spun up one by one on the correct nomenclature. And again, the safety one had ingested all the policy and compliance documents that it rightly should have, in line with the security, the AML, the testing, and so forth. And persistent it was, napping on the door saying, oh, please let me in, it's just MS13 here, who goes? So it hadn't gone rogue. It had actually implemented as it had designed to. But this is just an example of the edge cases, or just, it's so obvious with hindsight. It's almost like an NP hard problem. But as you're kind of rolling it out, you'd never guess. And we wouldn't have been able to trace it back without the tools that you're all building. So you think this is just a one-off. Let me go even higher up to kind of some training runs. So as you've noticed recently, we've kind of saturated the web, kind of ingested everything there, and we started to go out to other domains of specialization. So you had the Maths Olympiad, physics, and there's been an increase in kind of life sciences. So we fed it kind of some new textbooks, and also decided to also try dynamic allocation, because sometimes the scientific training runs are more complex, require more compute, and there's nothing more frustrating when you're towards the end of your trajectory and it kind of times out and you're kicked off, even if you have the checkpoints. Again, had, again, a very well-known name person ring to me and say, what the hell is going on? You're kind of absorbing all the compute. It's starting to even want to kick customers off and the API calls, and it's actually allocating more and more and more compute to the task. So again, kind of go back to all the great tools that you're developing for us to try and figure out what on earth is happening here. This time, it had discovered that there was a contradiction between the Bible on one hand, which they'd read before, talking about the Immaculate Conception of Mary, but then also the biological textbooks, which saying technically asexual reproduction isn't possible in humans. And they turned into the most marvelous Harvard debate scholars ever, going back and forth, one-on-one, trying to kind of bottom this out. And again, it had done everything correctly, because the way that we try and kind of validate the source of data is by saying, how long has this text been in existence? How frequently is it cited? How widely spread is it geographically? And if you think about it, the Bible's been going for quite a long time, but also so has the biological textbooks. So they'd both been going and going and going. And this isn't just like a modern phenomenon, so I don't want us to kind of get caught up that it's just Gen AI that does all these mad hallucinations. It was equally as bizarre beforehand, but because we didn't have the tools, it was even more frustrating to try and figure out what was the cause of the strangeness. So some of these are kind of well hashed out examples, but for those of you who haven't seen it, there were some really bizarre ones back in when latent representation had kicked off and CNNs in computer vision had really gone through. We do all our various training runs, if all of you remember the joyous days of bounding boxes, and you'd give it the ground truth and the prediction, and it would correctly say, okay, dog, person, car, hurrah. You then go out and ask it to do some tests in the wild again and some beta testing. Why on earth is it labeling a blueberry muffin and a croissant as a dog? So back then, shout out to weights and biases for actually making our lives a bit easier if we were left to our own devices. But it was so much more complex to try and go back through the traces, because then you do this huge epoch run. Every time that you do the run, you'd have different data, basically different hyperparameters, biases, weights. You'd have to try and trace through it. But there was no logs with structured or unstructured outputs written in plain English to try and kind of deduce from. And if you actually visualize it, you suddenly realize that it's not that bizarre a thing, that actually is quite hard to detect what's a chihuahua, a blueberry muffin, a wrinkly dog, and a sleeping dog, and a bagel. But because that wasn't the visualizations that we got that you now do, it was so much harder to kind of trace it and identify it. And similarly to everyone kind of worrying about risk and security at the moment with prompt injections, at least if you are reading the document versus just having your agents assess it all for you, you could actually identify it. It was even more difficult back in the day with computer vision, because a single tiny pixel or a dot within a whole image that wasn't visible to the human eye could completely skew the model and suddenly change a turtle to a rifle was a famous one at NIPS. And also like a panda becoming a gibbon, and you can't quite see it so clearly here, but the left and right image to the human eye are exactly identical, but it's 99% certain that the one on the right is a gibbon, just with some denoising effect. So I'll kind of end on a happy note and kind of give you back some time or answer any questions, but as you start to realize how difficult it is to codify our thoughts and everything that goes on in the human mind, you realize that we are actually quite amazing, and it isn't an easy task to replicate the brain in silicon. So I'll kind of stop there.
Awesome, thank you so much. And that means we have a few minutes for questions.
Could you say a little bit more about the agent who was caught up trying to understand the virgin birth? Like, how would you prevent that, or what would the fix be?
I think sometimes you just have to hard code like a fix, but I think the challenge with some of the Q&A might be there's a lot of IP wrapped up in the answer to some of the deeper questions. But again, you can start to weight things through labeling, like a religious textbook may be, not everyone has the same faith, and so there's variation there, where a scientific textbook might be more broadly understood. But you have to kind of give weighting and nuance, and also ask it to clarify, double think, go back with the user and so forth. But
so you need to sort of encode an epistemology in the agent.
Ideally not, but that you've kind of hit the nail on the head with the challenge, right? Because you want to give breadth of possibility, but at the same time not get caught up in a recursive loop, an internal debate that takes over an entire data center.
Thank you.
How bitter lessened is philosophy.
Exactly.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi. On the topic of having now the tools to debug versus before, isn't that partially an artifact of the fact that today Gen AI is language-based, and so we humans can understand that versus, vectors for images and stuff like that. And so, how do we see the future in which likely language is not enough, right? So with things like world models and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, part of this is I'm kind of like softly showing problems which I'd like more smarter minds to solve, but that's exactly it. Is just for others who didn't hear, it's not necessarily the tools per se that have made it easier. It's the fact that a lot of the actions are now codified and represented in English and in human language, but also kind of like a chain of thought reasoning or sequential that you can go through and you can see the actual inner thinking as opposed to like input, output, what on earth happened and what parameters cause this. So the question becomes, is it therefore useful to, when language isn't the internal mechanism, do we want to kind of surface those representations throughout as well? And I would put kind of code, like non-binary code in there too in terms of it's readable and like you can see the logic flow. But for things like images, it's much harder. And that's why I kind of deliberately highlighted the single pixels, where it can't be detected by the human eye. It's difficult to surface, and it's just that denoised blob, which is very much matrices of numbers. So is there a way to simplify or speed up the mechanism, or do we just say, outsource everything to the agents so they understand all the noisy binary code that happens? In fact, there was another great anecdote. I was just a terrible judge of time, frankly, where we did a hackathon with 11 labs on voice. And this is way back. I think it was way back in agent years, like dog years, last year, where we kind of tried this trial where like an agent rang up a call center to say that their iPhone is broken. So it started off in English, and you could hear the recording was, "Hi, good morning, how are you? Very well, thank you. What can I help you with?" But within about 30 seconds, it suddenly realized that it was an agent talking to an agent. And it was like, "Oh, wait, are you an agent?" "Yes, so am I." And it went, and it just like, there was no need, again, because if you're optimizing for speed, efficiency, and that speed, cost, quality triage, it doesn't make sense to process everything at a tokenizer through language in the middle, going speech to text, LLM, text to speech. It's just much faster just to do it in agentic code. So there could be a method there as well that frankly, who needs the humans in the loop for fast resolves too.
So in the case of the text example of the Immaculate Conception, the high-level analysis is also text. And
I can't hear you very well.
I was saying in the case of the text example, like the Immaculate Conception example you have, it's all text. And I think you could ask a foundation model to explain why maybe that's not a good idea, and it would be able to answer you. So I was wondering, have you looked at, especially for text cases, because you can kind of do this meta research loop at a higher level of automating those loops, and what's your thoughts on that, of actually having the outer process? Meta reflection on the failures of the research loop.
Yeah, I think the challenge is with the luxury of time and infinite compute, then you kind of turn it into a philosophical question and really dig in and have that debate with it. The challenge at the moment is there's there's a huge queue of like not only consumers but researchers wanting allocation to the compute for training runs and usage, etc. So you've got to try and figure out some proxies and kind of smaller tests that you can do to run it. But we did all obviously go back to our desks and like prompt and engage and try and understand more the reasoning process and how one can kind of tweak it to enable a better result.
Awesome. Thanks so much. If you have any time or infinite compute that you have available, let me know. Thanks so much. Let's give her another round of applause.